Any health-related information on the following show provides general information only. Content presented on any show, by any host, or by any guest should not be substituted for a doctor's advice. Always consult your physician before you begin any new diet, exercise, or training program. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
Welcome to Healing Ties on the Whole Care Network. On Healing Ties, we're creating a life to love after caregiving ends by sharing stories and resources and being with awesome people like you. Now that caregiving has ended, let the Healing Ties begin. Here's your host, Chris McClellan, the Bowtie Guy.
Well, greetings everyone. It is Chris McClellan, the Bowtie Guy, for another episode of Healing Ties. Thanks for joining us today. Just a couple of quick updates on the Whole Care Network, and goodness, there's a lot going on the network right now. Our first blog post is up and running. Just go to thewholecarenetwork.com and you'll see our carousel on the front page, and it's simply the Whole Care Network blog. It kind of gives you an idea of what we plan to do here on our blog, and we encourage any one of our listeners, if they have a topic or they'd like to write, submit a guest post on the blog, just give us a shout out at wecare@wholecarenetwork.com. Again, that's wecare@wholecarenetwork.com. Our 6-series podcast featuring Amanda Singleton, the caregiver lawyer, is now live and available on the Whole Care Network. Amanda is going through her terrific story of caring for her mom and how her mom's diagnosis of cancer just shifted her career from that of a trial attorney to that as a caregiver advocate. And our next 6-series podcast featuring singer-songwriter Barbara McAfee will be debuting in a couple of weeks on the network. Just check out Barbara and Amanda's landing page on the Whole Care Network. Just go under the resource tabs. And Barbara's, oh goodness, we just finished recording Barbara's a series last week, and she's got some beautiful songs that she has attached to her caregiving journey for her mom. And the title for that 6-series podcast is Songs for the Caregiver Soul. So be sure to check that out, coming on to the Whole Care Network in June. And June is just right around the corner. But let's get to today. Goodness, my guest today reached out to me. It's been a couple of months ago, and we've had a couple of delightful conversations. And I have to think that today's conversation just might be a tad emotional, but my guest today, Pat Hurley, is a poet and life coach who lives in Columbus, Ohio. She's here to talk about how writing poetry helped her and her late husband, Bill Hurley, navigate the challenges of a newly married life after his diagnosis with esophageal cancer. And Pat, welcome to the show. We've waited long to do this, but today's the day.
Well, thank you for having me.
Oh goodness, as I was able to review and go through your book of poems today and prepare for our visit, as I mentioned to you offline, it might get a little emotional today because we have. In these caregiving journeys, we all have this innate ability to understand each other, even though our situations might be a little bit different. But when you bring up esophageal cancer, that really hits home.
Yes. Yeah, it can be a rough one.
Yeah. So tell our listeners a little bit about you and, of course, your husband, and then let's get into the poetry.
Okay. Well, Bill and I had a wonderful late life romance. We met a couple of years before he was diagnosed with cancer, and actually our wedding date was set about a month after his diagnosis. So we went ahead with it and vowed to live the most active, wonderfully romantic life that we could from that point on. And we're always hopeful, of course, that maybe the cancer would be cured. Unfortunately, it wasn't. But one of our strategies for getting through this time was writing poetry. We both love to write. I had really focused more on humor writing up until this point, and still do that. I write a humor column in our local papers. But the cancer certainly took me to a different place in my writing, and Bill suggested that we might approach this by writing poems from his perspective as the patient and mine as the caregiver or spouse going through this. And it turned out to be a brilliant idea, I think, therapeutically, because it gave us each an opportunity to be honest in our feelings. Mm-hmm. I will say that Bill said he really didn't want to hear any poems of angst from me as we were going through this. So I wrote these poems, which have now been published in a book called Hard to Swallow, without sharing many of them with him because they did have some angst, but they were very helpful for me to be writing. He wrote his poems, and most of his I did hear ahead of time. Some I found later in a journal that he was keeping, and they were his musings on end-of-life issues. So the combination of poems is in the book, and the way it's laid out is my poem is on one side of the page, his is on the other, and although it's not an exact point-counterpoint, it does give the two perspectives on this experience we were going through together.
I hearken back to, well, just I can only speak from my experience, but that's the only fair thing to do, and trying to find something together to do while in the midst of a diagnosis, and there does seem to be something therapeutic about writing.
It certainly has always been therapeutic for me. Even humor writing, looking at life through a humorous lens is therapeutic. And Bill managed in the book to have a wonderfully humorous poem musing about death, which has been a favorite of many of the people who have read this book or listened to readings of the book.
Well, humor, especially in the midst of a diagnosis, when it's done properly and people know how to use it, really can make a difficult situation a little bit more lighthearted, and we can really take we can take it, and we can take a real close look at it as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it gives you a chance to step back a little and get some relief from a difficult time.
I remember a number of years ago when I was doing clinical pastoral education in hospice, and one of our weekly tasks was to spend the day in the emergency room at a trauma center, and I was taken back. I was taken back by that experience for a number of reasons. Just the pure dedication that the medical team did, especially in these trauma emergencies, but the way they used humor in the middle of these tragic events to help keep them focused. And I've always remembered that as I've moved along in my caregiving experience and talking to people, and when you can make a situation that is already difficult just a little bit more lighthearted, I think it really brings people closer together.
Yeah. Very true.
So do you have any favorite poems of yours? I know I've got a couple, but I wanted to know.
Well, one of the poems that Bill Bill wrote that is a favorite and kind of underlies his philosophy is right at the beginning of the book, and it really likens the journey through cancer or through life to walking a labyrinth.
Yes.
And so that one I would kind of like to read just because to me it carried a lot of meaning.
Mm-hmm.
So
I would encourage you to read it. That would be terrific.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Bill was a deep thinker, and I think it comes through here. Mm-hmm. Do what you can for as long as you can, and then when you can't, stop. Surrender to the labyrinth. Though your steps grow silent, the journey continues, and you'll always be a part of it. And so as we were going through this together, we often walked to labyrinths, and it was a way of reminding ourselves that we were on the same journey, maybe at a different pace. We didn't really know, but that this was just part of life. And that was helpful to me. You'll see in some of my poems that I resisted that idea.
Uh-huh.
It was hard for me, but I thought the idea was really sound.
I love the metaphor of the labyrinth. Yes.
Yes, and that was powerful for us. Also, labyrinths are wonderful because they're kind of a brain-twisting experience that helps you shift perspectives sometimes. And, it's a modern adaptation of the long medieval journey that people took. Mm-hmm. So we had both, interestingly, been labyrinth walkers even before we met. So it was an exercise that we continued, and it got more meaning as we were going through something difficult together.
So that's the two of you did have a spiritual connection even before the diagnosis.
We did. We had a lot of things in common, and we found that we had each, in separate years, won the same humor writing contest.
Oh, now isn't that fascinating?
And, yeah, and I think that was one of the things that was like, oh, this is really meant to be. So, we had a lot in common, and people said, wow, you two are really kind of wired the same way. It was an easy relationship.
Oh, goodness, I connect with that so well, and I just appreciate sharing these wonderful stories. But can I read one of my favorites?
Sure.
Okay, it's Cancer, 50 Essential Things to Do. This orange paperback is my bedtime companion now that it's changed your life. Never mind the oncologist with their surprise shrugs when the cancer returned. Never mind the friends who noticed your 80-pound weight loss with, "How are you?" Or let you know that Uncle Cletus, feeling the same thing stuck in his throat, was gone in 3 months. This book and the nutritionist and the Reiki master say otherwise. The secret's in the food and energy and exercise, at least 30 minutes a day. And juicing, everything, and dandelion root and grass-fed beef, in bone broth boiled for 2 days, and nothing in the microwave, and nothing processed, and everything except the nothings in moderation. But most of all, they say, live your life like you didn't have cancer. One of the one of the things that Richard and I did after the diagnosis, and when I started blogging, I used this tagline, and this is why this has just touched me so much. The tagline I used in our blog post is, "We might have cancer, but cancer doesn't have us." Mm-hmm. Cancer never really had us. We had each other, and I have the sense that you feel the same way.
Yes. I think the idea of living your life like you didn't have cancer is a sound one. Sometimes these lifestyle changes, though, make it really hard. And I just saw the irony in it. I think as somebody who writes humor, it was like, yeah, okay, no problem. So I think we tried to be very intentional about doing as many things as we could when we could, and tried to plan treatments around that. And I'm glad we did that. We I think, lived life as full as we possibly could under the circumstances. Sometimes to the point of frustration, because it seemed like we were chasing life so hard we didn't have a chance to stop. And I wrote a poem about that I did share with Bill, actually, which caused him to take me to the labyrinth. It was called Jealous. Can I read that one?
Sure.
Jealous. Okay, I'll admit it. I'm jealous of the cancer. Ever since she's moved in, she's had you breathless, chasing life, focusing only on what's important. When can we just stop a while and cry? So there's that balance between chasing and living life to the fullest and sitting with it, too. That it's a delicate balance.
Mm-hmm. It is. And that balance that, when I think of the balance, I think of the seesaw that we're on when we're in the midst of caregiving. And, finding that balance in the midst of this it's hard.
Yep. But probably one of the richer experiences of life.
Yes.
I mean, you were really dealing with life and death issues, and that's not a place where we usually live in such immediacy. So it's poignant emotionally. It's very different from everyday life, at least as I have experienced it.
Well, I think I could speak for you when I say this, because I the sense that, for Richard and I, especially those last 6 months, is I could never imagine being closer to another person than those last 6 months, and as close as the two of us came together because of the diagnosis.
Yes.
It maybe it's hard to project what the future will be, or if there will be another relationship, or if I will even be open to another relationship. But what I do know from the experience, I can't imagine ever being as close to somebody else as I was close, as two people were close. And I would think that you might have had that same experience. Yeah,
very, very intense.
Very intense.
This was my first experience being with someone who had cancer. I had previously been married and widowed. My husband had long-term diabetes, and there wasn't the same immediacy to that illness as I experienced here. It was certainly sad, and it went on for many years, but this was just very dramatic. Plus, we had just fallen in love.
Right.
Had a whirlwind romance, so it was a lot of emotion.
If I'm not asking for advice to give advice, but what I'm asking would be, if you were to meet a new caregiver who had just received a diagnosis, who was caring for somebody that just received a diagnosis of cancer, what would you say to that person?
talk and listen deeply. I think that is the best advice I could give,
Mm-hmm.
to be connected with each other and really try to understand what the other person is going through. And then, navigate the best you can. It's going to be a very rich period. And, keep hope on the horizon, too.
Keep hope on the horizon, yeah.
Yeah, and sometimes you have to adjust that hope and ask yourself, what can we hope for now?
Mm-hmm.
But hope is very important, and perhaps what you wind up hoping for at the end is not what you wanted to hope for at the beginning.
Right.
Or perhaps it will be. I mean, you just don't know. So I think you have to hang in there together and talk and listen and learn to hope together.
And finding that comfort zone, because I think, as we can attest to this as well, when you're in the middle of caregiving, you think these days are so hard and difficult, and they are. But in the end, after it's over, and you sit back and you think about what an experience it's been, in the long run, the good days far outweigh the bad days. It's just that the bad days were more intense.
Right.
Yeah.
And I was incredibly fortunate to be with someone who was spiritually deep and hopeful and kept trying to bring everything he could to make this marriage as good as possible under difficult circumstances.
Sure. Well, Pat, it's just
You're
a
right.
delight.
This is emotional.
Yeah, that's why we do this, because it's so important for us to be able to share our stories. Not only is it a little bit healing, but it also helps those who are going before us on this journey, because we all know that we're not the only ones. But when we share our experience, and it's the reason why we're doing these podcasts and creating the Whole Care Network, because I believe that it's through story sharing where diversity meets the road to combat a common cause. And by sharing our stories, we get to know each other a little bit better and understand each other, but we get to help people as well. So, goodness,
Sure.
We could do this all day, Pat, but I think we'll be in an emotional drither if we don't. But I'd love to have you back to do a few more of these. This would be terrific.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I really value what you're doing. I think this is important, and it's sometimes easiest for caregivers to be able to connect online because you have so much going on in your lives. So you're providing a safe space for people to come and share their stories, and there's a lot of value in that. So I appreciate it.
Well, goodness, Pat. So we just have a couple of minutes left. Let our listeners know where they can purchase your book, find you online, and then I'll just kind of twist your arm a little bit to do a few more of these, because I'm sure people are going to want to hear your wisdom and experience.
Thank you. You can find me online at PatHurleyPoet.com, and the book Hard to Swallow is available through Night Ballet Press, which is a small press in Elyria, Ohio. And if you Google Night Ballet Press Hard to Swallow, the book will come up for purchase. Also on my website, I've written a facilitator's guide. We didn't get into this, but the poems in the book lend themselves to being discussion starters. And I've put together a guide for small group facilitators that includes questions raised by various poems. So if you're looking for a structure for a small group, whether it's a hospice group, caregivers group, whatever, that's also available and downloadable on my website.
I think we have our topic for our next podcast.
There you go.
There you go. Well, goodness. I'm kind of an emotional. It's such a wonderful way to start the new week off. But I've not only have learned so much about you. I've been able to sit back and recount and think about caregiving with Richard and I, and it warms my heart to be able to talk to somebody like yourself who went down this same path with esophageal cancer. And Pat, I can't thank you enough for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, and I'll look forward to another conversation.
Very much so. And although each person's story is different, there are common issues that all caregivers face. For caregivers, these can revolve around anger, guilt, and sadness. No matter how hard you try, you will always fell short.
Yeah.
It's helpful to know that you're not alone in experiencing these feelings. And Pat, with the great work that you're doing and with your book, Hard to Swallow, you are certainly someone who's creating healing ties all around us. I can't wait to do this again with you.
Thank you. I'll look forward to it. Have a great week.
Have a great week, everybody. Okay, that does it for this episode of Healing Ties. Be sure to check Pat out on her website. Hard to Swallow is the name of the book, and we'll be having Pat on another podcast here real soon. Okay, as you know, I'm Chris McClellan, the Bowtie Guy. I'm creating a life to love after caregiving ends through radio, writing, travel advocacy, and being with awesome people like Pat Hurley. Healing Ties is a part of the Whole Care Network. Check us out online at thewholecarenetwork.com. We'll see you for another episode of Healing Ties real soon. Bye-bye.